Okay, so let's review stages of, I don't know if I want to say stages, the continuum of the manufacture of the Montell projectile point, which probably could be pulled and used as a little knife too, but I would assume that a lot of them are projectiles. So go get a rock, and then they do some rough blanking with a hammerstone, do some initial punch work to get the taper and thinness on the stem. And it's crucial to have some thinning around this area too, so that you don't fold anything off doing the rest of the punch work. And then continue working from the ends and the middle, usually from the end. That way it doesn't risk getting it too thick on the end and hitting it in the middle, and the end can pop off or anything can happen. Generally don't do a whole lot of work on this section. At that point, just take it down evenly, do some thinning. But at this stage, it's still pretty thick. Tool material can, come off there also. Then continue aggressive punch thinning. This is where a lot of breaks happen. And they're just hitting maybe not perfect platforms, just positionally correct platforms with high forces, almost certainly with a indirect percussion tool of some sort. I prefer the shaft punch for these. And then quite a bit of thinning happens at this stage. This piece was really wide, so normally though maybe this stage would be a little bit narrower. But this area was still not a whole lot of work done. But as these things thin down, the thickest spot will usually be right at the base. So this is a stage where really aggressive thinning happens and a lot of breaks happen. If there's a lot of breaks happen where it hints to some support, because this is sort of oval, so it isn't a candidate. But let's say this is blocked against something, and then it's punched here. If this edge is supported really well, but it's not here, then a lot of perverse fractures happen to the point of no support or bending. If there's pressure applied unevenly, you can really, you're putting shock and vibrations into a stone. So the slightest forces that go this way or this way will induce cracks and stresses. Or if there's a contour that will cause a flake to dive, then sometimes the pressure from the surface at that point can initiate a flake to dive down and then break on the next flake. So you can look at cross sections and you can see where diving flakes came, and then later on it broke because it was weak at a weak spot. You can tell if there's a platform was too heavy and it broke diagonally to the point where there's a curve. Most likely that was a back edge support problem. If it just snaps clean off in the middle, then that can be end snap, although that's less common on these. And how else can you break them? Just a flaw in the material. Or when they get thin, see how this flake's so aggressive, see how they're sort of diving down? The support in the middle and aggressive punching can cause flakes to dive down, and sometimes they'll even start to radially crack out. So that can cause a weak spot. Every once in a while, they actually chip through the center of these things, although that's not mostly on Montells. It would be on some of the thinner ovoid knives. So that's that stage. And then I did some more punching on this. So there's a pretty big gap between this and this. And I wish that I had better lighting when I did the punch work on this, and I really had spots where I struggled. So a smaller Montell and a little bit more friendly rock wouldn't be that big a deal. But you can see now how our bases were super thin, and I'm just playing everything down to the base. And now this is the thickest spot is probably right there, or maybe even right here. But that's plenty thin enough for a Montell. I'll need to do some more work on this. This is just like fresh. And then more refined edge work and needly tip. The edge work is very subtle, and it's easy to... The quickest way to make these things look bad is to get out your antler pressure flaking and start pressing some antler flakes across the surface. So really the punch flake is indicative, and then the edge work is minimal. And you have to do some careful work around these barbs. So, and then let's say it's reworked down and maybe broke, impacted, and used and resharpened. Then it'll just get smaller. And they can get excurvate to straight to recurvate edges with some very pronounced tips that are just no doubt just stabbing, mean, threatening tips. And the base variations will be regional. I don't know. Like all things in point types, there's a change in region. So contemporaneous groups, maybe neighboring groups, might have a variation. And then over time, techniques can evolve slightly, and just slight changes in how the points were made, whether it's an adaptation to what animals they're hunting or just people decided to, the 6 guys who made the certain kind of Montells went off and ran off the cliff with the buffalo that they pushed, and then they had to just, I don't know why I'm saying it's obviously dumb, but you know what I'm saying? There could be, in the case where there might be a specialized tool set, then maybe a small amount of people can have a bigger impact on how things change over time. But I'm more of a kind of person that would be that those subtle changes just happen over time. But the variation in the bases can be, site by site. They can just change just a little bit. So they're pretty neat point type because they're radical. I mean, they're so clunky and crazy. Some of them I've seen just around cortex, like it looks like a Curville knife that they put a Montell base on. It's really neat. And the conversation about why they're doing that and suggesting that people put handles on them to support it. It is a good point that Montells are awful thin and light, that if you had a robust handle on there, it might be a hindrance to, causing it to break off at the base if the support wasn't right. But if it was a low profile haft and it was used to assist in back edge support and some surface support by another person, it'd be something to look into. That's all I'm saying. If I wish that I had a napping buddy that would just sit and we could hold stuff for each other and work on projects, because it would really get an extra hand on things and somebody to say, hold on, that platform looks a little high there, and then you double check, you're like, oh man, you're right. That might make things easier. So the lighting was bad in the last video. I guess could do a little bit more punching on this to sort of get in between here and here. So maybe I'll do that briefly in the next video. And I'm not going to do all of the little pressure nibbling work because it's hard to do with this phone, and it's just so time consuming. So there's tons of other, and during the late archaic, all over the place, they seem to be doing a lot of this base first kind of flint napping. And you can speculate why, and that could be just a super long conversation. Anybody have any thoughts or challenges? I'd like to. I'm fine with being challenged and questioned. I prefer it when somebody has some experience with the technique or a tool set, because it's hard to argue against a position that you can't do. And I don't want to be in a situation where people can just say, well, you can do anything, so you represent a skill level that's not applicable because you're just an outlier of your skill level. But I push back hard against that, because I've worked so hard at learning different techniques that I struggled through that all of that's not recorded on YouTube, right? It's not. I didn't pop out of the gate and just I'll make anything you want. I can make the worst with the best of them and struggle as hard as anyone. So I've just been dogged. So, but feel free to offer any observations. My knowledge of point types, Texas point types, compared to somebody like Jason Newman is like I'm just a neophyte. So, but these are fun because they're militaristic. They had so much good Edwards rock, and the napping wasn't just for survival. They used these tools as part of their life, and of course that was part of their survival. But other places in the world for 100,000 years, they could do the same thing with simple flake tools and choppers. I mean, this is just cultural. These guys decided that this hobby of flint napping that also assisted them in making a living was something that they wanted to represent in their culture. And it's a badge of status and of pride and of just maybe not things so centered on like a competition, but just a reflection. It makes me mad when you watch the movies and you see natives running around, or cavemen running around with some dead skin animal put on their head and soot on their face, and they're hovering around a carcass and they're doing stuff. These people, if you could see, and not in all cases, but in most cases, probably how well made their clothes were, how fine their baskets were, and maybe they didn't have ceramics, but their stonework, their material technology, and their culture, and how that they perfected the component that represented what they wanted to show it's so fascinating. And North American biface traditions are amazing because the variety of charts and the amazing array of wonderful bifacial points. And like any place, if there's a lithic pore areas, or maybe not as much emphasis put on flint napping, you can see maybe some bipolar, some undeveloped napping skills. But just like when you go through an old house and you just see like a broken porcelain doll arm and a bottle top, and you're like, well, they didn't need good bottles, they could just use this. Well, a lot of the material culture that we're seeing doesn't represent the pool of what they could actually do. So the napping that happened, and the way that it was done, and how differently it was done, blows anything modern nappers can do in the next 500 years out of the water, without question, as far as looking at the strategies, the signatures, and then why it was done. Those are just fun, conversations over a beer, but trying to figure out the little signatures on the tools and try to putting the order to some of these projects together has just been really rewarding for me. And it's been fun to share with you guys. But don't by any means think that this is how Montells were done. This is a rough sample of my best guess of a possible way to do it. So this one is a little over 11-to-1 if you don't measure the thick area on the base. And this one these three are the same thickness. Probably has something to do with just how I developed my shaft punch and how I'm comfortable with this later stage thinning, and the material, more than anything else. But I'm not going to finish these up right now. Maybe I'll do a little punching on this, but I've gone on and on. So thanks for watching, and see you later.